Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Can you smell it? That faint, unforgettable scent of fresh pine needles, mixed with the sharp aroma of peeling a tangerine. Or perhaps you hear the steady, rhythmic ticking of the heavy mechanical clock on your grandmother's wall, blending with the gentle static of a radio playing softly in the kitchen. Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about 20 forgotten details of daily life in 1970s Russia. We are going to travel back to a time that feels like a beautiful, faded photograph. A time when our hearts were lighter, our doors were always open to neighbors, and happiness was found in the quiet, everyday moments. So, make yourself a hot cup of tea, sit back, and let us wander through the corridors of our shared memory. And please, stay with me until the very end, because I'm going to remind you of the most touching, magical tradition of our winter evenings. One that will surely bring a warm tear to your eye. Life back then flowed at an entirely different rhythm. Time moved slower, without the frantic, breathless rush that consumes our days now. We did not have the world in our pockets on a glowing screen, but our lives were incredibly rich in something much more valuable: genuine human connection. The act of waiting was a profound part of our existence, and it made the reward so much sweeter. We waited weeks for a handwritten letter to arrive in the small metal mailbox, recognizing the handwriting of a loved one with a leap of the heart. We waited all week for our favorite television program, gathering around the screen together, sharing the experience in real time. There is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology or endless consumer goods, our lives were somehow poorer or deprived. But you and I know the truth. Our world was bursting with a profound emotional wealth. We knew the names of everyone in our apartment building. We shared our joys and our sorrows across the kitchen table. And we fixed things that were broken instead of throwing them away. It was an era of extraordinary sincerity, where a simple conversation over a cup of tea held more warmth than 1,000 modern text messages. We lived deeply, we loved honestly, and we found absolute magic in the ordinary. Let us begin with a memory that lives at the very tip of your tongue. Do you remember the daily walk to the local bakery? In the 1970s, buying bread was not a chore, but a deeply sensory experience. You would walk through those heavy doors, and instantly a wave of warmth and the intoxicating aroma of fresh yeast and baked rye would wash over you. There were no plastic wrappers to ruin the crust. Instead, you used a large wooden fork tied to the counter with a coarse string to gently press the loaves, checking for that perfect, airy bounce that meant the bread was fresh from the oven. You would purchase a loaf of dark, slightly sour Darnitsky bread, or perhaps a warm white baton, holding it carefully in your hands. But the true magic happened on the walk home. The aroma was simply too much for any child to resist. Your fingers would naturally find the crispest, darkest edge of the crust. You would break off a small piece, the sound of the crunch echoing in your ears, and place it in your mouth. The contrast between the hard, slightly bitter crust and the soft, warm center was absolute perfection. You would arrive home with a loaf that was mysteriously missing both of its ends, anticipating the gentle, loving scolding from your mother. It was a taste of pure, unadulterated happiness that remains priceless in our hearts today. And now, let us recall the unmistakable music of the dairy aisle. I am talking about the heavy glass milk bottles with their wide, smooth necks. We did not throw these bottles away. We washed them meticulously with a special long brush, ensuring they were spotless, to return them to the store for a few precious kopecks. The tops were sealed not with plastic caps, but with soft colored aluminum foil. Do you remember the color coding? Silver was for regular milk, vibrant green was for kefir, and the beautiful striped gold and silver foil meant the rich, baked taste of ryazhenka. Opening them required a satisfying, precise press of the thumb, pushing the foil in just enough to break the seal without dropping it into the milk. When you gathered a few empty bottles to return, you would place them carefully into your string bag. As you walked down the street, the thick glass bottles would gently bump into each other, creating a distinctive melodic clinking sound. It was the background music of our mornings, a sound of responsibility and routine. Returning those bottles meant getting coins that felt heavy and significant in a child's pocket, often immediately spent on a sweet treat or an ice cream cone at the kiosk on the corner. Let us turn our gaze to the walls of our childhood bedrooms. Today, modern design calls for bare, painted walls, but back then, a beautiful heavy carpet hung on the wall was the absolute centerpiece of the room. It was not just a symbol of prosperity or a way to keep the freezing winter drafts from coming through the cold concrete walls, though it served both those purposes perfectly. For a child, that carpet was a canvas of endless imagination. When it was time for bed and the lights were turned off, the street lamp outside would cast a faint glow into the room. Lying there in the quiet dark, you would turn on your side and trace the intricate swirling floral or geometric patterns with your finger. You would find hidden faces, imaginary animals, and winding rivers within the woven threads of red, brown, and gold. The rough, woolen texture of the carpet against your fingertips was deeply comforting. It absorbed the sounds of the apartment, creating a muffled, cozy silence that wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. That wall carpet was the guardian of our dreams, a silent storyteller that lulled us to sleep night after night, long before the era of glowing screens. Think back to the sweltering heat of a late July afternoon. The asphalt is soft beneath your sandals and the air is thick. And then you see it. At the end of the street, the large, bright yellow barrel on two wheels with the word kvass painted in bold letters on the side. Standing behind it was usually a friendly, robust woman wearing a crisp white apron. Buying a drink from that barrel was a sacred summer ritual. You had two choices, a small glass for 3 kopecks or a large, heavy, faceted glass mug for 6. The most amazing part, something that shocks people today, was the washing system. There were no disposable cups. Everyone drank from the same heavy glass mugs. After finishing your drink, you placed the mug upside down on a special circular tray. The vendor would press it down and a powerful fountain of cold water would shoot up, rinsing the glass for the next customer. We never worried about it. We just trusted each other and the taste of that kvass. It was dark, rich and slightly fermented, with the unmistakable tang of real rye bread. It was perfectly chilled, foaming over the edges of the mug, quenching your thirst in a way that no modern bottled soda ever could. It was the absolute, refreshing taste of a Soviet summer. Here is a detail that will surely make you smile with recognition. The careful washing and drying of plastic bags. In those days, a bright plastic bag with a colorful foreign logo, perhaps advertising Marlboro cigarettes or a Western brand of jeans, was considered a genuine luxury item. We did not simply use them once and throw them in the trash. That would have been an unthinkable waste. When the bag became slightly dirty, our mothers would take it into the bathroom. They would carefully wash the plastic inside and out with warm water and a bar of brown laundry soap, treating it as delicately as a fine silk scarf. Then came the drying process. The wet plastic bags would be smoothed out and stuck directly onto the tiled walls above the bathtub, where they would cling perfectly until they were completely dry. Or they would be hung up on the clothesline in the kitchen with wooden clothespins, fluttering gently in the breeze from the open window. People walked around town with these faded, well-worn plastic bags with a sense of pride. It reflects a time when we valued the things we had, when everyday items were scarce, and we treated our possessions with a deep, practical respect that has been entirely lost in today's throwaway culture. Let us remember the dangerous yet utterly irresistible alchemy of boiling condensed milk. We called it skushenka, and it came in those iconic blue and white tin cans. While it was delicious straight from the can, sweet and milky, boiling it transformed it into a thick, rich, dark caramel that was the ultimate delicacy. The ritual was fraught with a thrilling sense of peril. You would place the unopened tin can into a deep pot of water, turn on the gas stove, and wait for 2 to 3 hours. The most important rule was that the can had to be completely submerged in boiling water at all times. If you got distracted, if you went outside to play and forgot about the pot, the water would boil away, and then disaster would strike. The can would explode with a deafening bang, sending a sticky, boiling hot spray of sweet caramel all over the ceiling, the walls, and the curtains of the kitchen. Cleaning it up was a nightmare that lasted for days. But if you were patient and careful, you were rewarded. Opening that cooled can to reveal the thick, brown, spreadable caramel, eating it directly with a spoon, or using it to fill freshly baked waffle tubes, was a culinary triumph that tasted like pure childhood joy. Now, imagine the weight of a rotary telephone in your hand. The receiver was heavy, substantial, made of solid, cold plastic that warmed up as you talked. Making a phone call was a deliberate physical act. You had to insert your finger into the hole of the dial, pull it all the way around to the metal stopper and let it go. Do you remember the sound? That slow, rhythmic, mechanical whirring noise as the dial spun back into place. Tick, 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 tick. If you had an emergency, dialing 02 for the police or 03 for the ambulance took precious seconds. But what is truly remarkable is that we held entire directories in our minds. We remembered the phone numbers of all our relatives, our friends, our schoolmates and the local clinic entirely by heart. If you were not at home, you had to find a red telephone booth on the street. You would dig deep into your coat pocket, your fingers searching for that specific, familiar shape of a 2-kopeck coin. You would drop it into the slot, hear the metallic clink, and wait for the long, unbroken tone before dialing. It was a time when communication required effort, which made the voice on the other end of the line feel so much closer and more meaningful. Think back to the magical winter evenings when the filmstrip projector, the dia projector, was brought out of its box. This was our home cinema, long before the days of videocassettes or the internet. The preparation was a ritual in itself. You had to find a blank white wall, or, more often, hang a clean white bedsheet over the doorframe, securing it with thumbtacks. The room was plunged into darkness. When the projector was turned on, a bright, dusty beam of light shot across the room, and the distinct warm smell of the heated metal and the special lamp filled the air. You would carefully thread the plastic film strip into the top slot. Then the magic began. Click! A bright picture appeared on the sheet. Click! The next scene. There was no sound, so we had to read the captions at the bottom of the screen out loud. Usually it was a parent or an older sibling reading the fairy tales, altering their voice for different characters, while the younger children sat mesmerized on the carpet in their pajamas. Click, click. We watched stories about Marcia and the bear or brave space explorers. It was a quiet, intimate family activity, filled with warmth and the comforting scent of the hot projector lamp in a dark, cozy room. Let us recall the humble string bag, affectionately known as the avoska. This brilliant invention was an absolute staple of everyday life. The word itself comes from the Russian expression meaning perhaps or on the off chance. You always carried an avoska folded up in your pocket or purse, just on the off chance that you stumbled upon a store selling a rare deficit item, like good sausage, imported oranges or fresh watermelons. When empty, it was practically weightless and took up no space at all, but it was incredibly strong. When filled, the woven threads stretched and expanded to hold an astonishing amount of groceries. Walking home from the market, you could see exactly what your neighbors had managed to buy that day. The only downside was the way the thin nylon strings would painfully cut deeply into your fingers when carrying heavy glass jars or a massive summer watermelon. Yet we endured it with a sense of triumph, because carrying a heavy avoska meant you were bringing home something wonderful for your family. It was a symbol of hope, readiness, and the beautiful unpredictability of daily shopping in the 1970s. Do you remember the sweet ingenuity of making homemade sugar lollipops over the open flame of the gas stove? When there were no fancy candies in the cupboard, we created our own magic with just sugar, a drop of water, and perhaps a tiny splash of vinegar. The simplest method involved taking a heavy metal tablespoon, filling it with granulated sugar, and holding it directly over the blue flame of the burner. You had to have a steady hand, Slowly, the white crystals would begin to melt at the edges, bubbling and turning into a clear liquid, then shifting to a rich golden amber color. The smell of burning sugar would instantly fill the kitchen. If you let it go too long, it became dark and bitter, but if you timed it perfectly, it was divine. If your family was lucky, you had a heavy cast iron mold to pour the liquid sugar into, shaping the candies into the famous petushki, the roosters on a wooden matchstick. We would eagerly wait for the metal to cool, pry it open, and pull out the sticky, beautiful, amber-colored bird. Sucking on that homemade lollipop, tasting the slight hint of burnt caramel, was the absolute taste of a happy, resourceful childhood. Let us talk about the daily morning ritual of the pioneer tie. If you were a schoolchild of a certain age, wearing that bright red triangular piece of silk-like fabric was a matter of immense pride and strict discipline. You could not simply throw it around your neck. Every single morning before leaving for school, the tie had to be perfectly ironed. You would lay it flat on the ironing board, sprinkle a little water on it from a glass, and carefully press the hot, heavy iron over the fabric. You had to be incredibly careful. If the iron was too hot, the synthetic material would melt instantly, leaving a dark, ruined hole, which was a true disaster. Once it was flawlessly smooth and crisp, you stood in front of the mirror to tie it. There was a very specific, mandated way to make the knot, a perfect square that sat neatly at the collar of your white uniform shirt. Wearing it meant you were part of something larger, a young builder of the future. The feeling of that smooth, freshly ironed fabric against your collar as you ran to catch the bus is a tactile memory that is permanently stitched into the fabric of our youth. Think back to the incredible versatility of the daily newspaper. Pravda or Izvestia were not just sources of news, they were the most multifunctional items in the entire household. When spring came and it was time to paint the ceilings or the window frames, what did your father wear on his head? A magnificent three-cornered hat, skillfully folded from a double page of the newspaper to protect his hair from dripping white paint. If you went to the market to buy salted herring, the vendor would slap the fish onto a sheet of newspaper, wrap it up tightly and hand it to you. In the winter, when you came home from the snowy hills with your felt boots completely soaked through, your mother would crumple up old newspapers and stuff them tightly into the boots to draw out the moisture overnight. And perhaps the most sacred use of all was the weekly television schedule published on the back page. We would sit with a red pen or a pencil, carefully circling the movies or the children's cartoons we absolutely could not miss that week. The newspaper was our wrapping paper, our protective gear and our planner, serving a dozen lives before finally being discarded. And speaking of television, let us remember the agony and the joy of our heavy wooden television sets. We had names like Rubin or Record. Watching television was an active, sometimes physical endeavor. There were no remote controls. To change the channel, you had to get up and turn a heavy, stiff plastic dial with a loud mechanical click. But the real adventure was the signal. Just as the most exciting part of the movie approached, the picture would inevitably start to roll vertically, flipping faster and faster, or dissolve into a snowstorm of static. The universal remedy, known in every single household across the country, was a precise, firm slap to the side or the top of the wooden cabinet. Miraculously, physical violence seemed to fix the delicate vacuum tubes inside, and the picture would stabilize. We watched the wonderful program Visiting a Fairy Tale on weekends, waiting for the kind, soothing voice of Aunt Valja. We sat mesmerized by the glowing black and white screen, ignoring the occasional static, completely captivated by the stories. That heavy box in the corner of the room was a window to the world, bringing families together on the sofa every single evening. Let us recall the courtyard, the dvor, which was the absolute center of our social universe. The courtyard was not just an empty space between apartment buildings. It was a living, breathing community. In the center, there was always a sturdy wooden table with benches. Here, the men of the neighborhood would gather on summer evenings to play dominoes. The loud, sharp smack of the heavy plastic tiles hitting the wooden table echoed through the air, accompanied by laughter and heated debates. A few steps away, girls would be jumping for hours over a stretched elastic band, playing rezinochka, gracefully maneuvering through increasingly difficult levels until the sun went down. But the true rulers of the courtyard were the grandmothers, sitting side by side on the long benches near the entrance doors. They knew everything about everyone. They were our security cameras, our moral judges, and our guardians. They watched over all the children, making sure nobody strayed too far, and they never hesitated to scold us if we misbehaved. To walk through the courtyard was to walk through a large extended family, where you were known, watched, and quietly loved by a community that shared its life outdoors. Do you remember the distinct, unforgettable aromas of a Soviet bathroom? The scents were strong, memorable, and defined an entire generation. For the men, Sunday morning meant a thorough shave, followed by a generous splash of shipper cologne. It came in a heavy glass bottle, and it possessed a sharp, aggressive, intensely piney and mossy scent that practically burned the nostrils. It was the scent of a freshly groomed father, strong and reassuring. And for the women, for special occasions, there was the legendary perfume, Red Moscow. The bottle was elegant, topped with a glass stopper shaped like the onion dome of a cathedral. The perfume itself was a heavy, rich, amber-colored liquid that smelled intensely of carnations, jasmine, and vanilla. It was a potent, dramatic floral scent. When your mother opened that bottle before going to the theater or a New Year's party, the rich aroma would instantly fill the entire apartment and linger in the hallway long after she had left. These were not subtle fragrances. They were bold, unforgettable statements of elegance and adulthood, deeply etched into our olfactory memories. Let us revisit the passionate hobby of collecting that possessed almost every child. Without video games or endless television channels, we found immense joy in acquiring and organizing small treasures. One of the most popular items were small metal pins, known as znaczki. They commemorated everything from space explorations and the Olympic Games to ancient cities and cartoon characters. We would pin them carefully onto beautiful velvet or felt pennants hung on the walls of our rooms, creating heavy, colorful tapestries of metal. Others collected postage stamps, spending hours gently steaming the corners of envelopes over a boiling kettle to peel the stamps off without tearing them. We would place them in thick albums, admiring the exotic animals or foreign landscapes. And then there were the candy wrappers, smoothed out perfectly with a fingernail and kept in empty tin boxes. The best part of collecting was the trade. We would bring our duplicates out to the courtyard, negotiating fiercely with our friends, trading 2 common pins for 1 rare stamp. It was our first lesson in economics, driven by pure passion and the thrill of the hunt. Think about the long hypnotic journeys on the passenger trains that crossed our vast country. Taking a train was not just a mode of transportation, it was a unique state of existence. The rhythmic metallic clacking of the wheels over the tracks, ta-dam, 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 provided the steady heartbeat of the journey. But the true symbol of this experience was the tea. Shortly after departure, the conductor would walk down the narrow corridor carrying hot black tea. It was not served in disposable cups, but in thick, faceted glass cups, held securely in magnificent heavy metal holders called podstakaniki. These holders were beautifully embossed with images of monuments, oak leaves, or space rockets. You would sit on the lower bunk, watching the endless forests of birch trees blur past the window, holding the warm metal handle. As the train swayed gently from side to side, the small metal spoon would clink softly against the glass, creating a soothing silvery chime. Drinking sweet tea from the podstakannik while listening to the wheels and sharing food with strangers in your compartment is a memory of profound peace and a uniquely Russian romanticism of the road. Let us remember the culinary triumph of the homemade waffle tubes filled with cream. This required a special heavy cast iron waffle maker, the kind with 2 long handles that you place directly over the open gas flame of the stove. The process was demanding and required perfect timing. You poured the sweet buttery batter onto the hot iron, squeezed the heavy handles together and listened to it sizzle. Within moments, the rich, mouth-watering smell of warm vanilla and melting butter would fill the apartment. But the real challenge came when you opened the iron. You had to act lightning fast. While the thin, golden waffle was still incredibly hot, you had to roll it into a tight tube using your bare hands. It burned your fingers terribly, but if you waited even a few seconds, the waffle would become rigid and brittle, breaking into pieces. Once you had a pile of crisp, perfectly rolled tubes, you would fill them using a pastry bag, usually with that boiled condensed milk we talked about earlier, mixed with a little butter. The crunch of that delicate waffle giving way to the thick, sweet caramel inside was a reward well worth the burnt fingertips. Do you remember the humble yet essential blue enameled bidon? This small, bucket-like container with a metal handle and a matching lid was the designated vessel for buying draft milk or sour cream. On early weekend mornings, you would take the bidon and walk to the local store, or wait in the courtyard for the large milk truck to arrive. A queue would form early, a line of neighbors holding similar enameled containers, chatting quietly in the morning chill. When it was your turn, the seller would take a large, specialized metal measuring scoop with a long handle, dip it deeply into the massive metal vat, and expertly pour exactly 1 liter of fresh, cold milk into your bidon. The sound of the thick liquid splashing against the enameled bottom was incredibly satisfying. Walking home, you had to step carefully, trying not to swing your arm too much so the milk wouldn't slosh out from under the lid. That milk was different. It separated, leaving a thick layer of rich cream at the top. By the time you reached home, it was raw, honest food, carried by hand in a blue enameled bucket that sat proudly in the refrigerator. And finally, I want to remind you of the most magical ritual of all, the preparation for the new year. It was the absolute pinnacle of our year. For days before, the entire family was in a state of joyous frenzy. You would take crisp white paper napkins, fold them into small triangles, and use sharp scissors to cut out intricate, delicate snowflakes. Then, using soapy water, you would stick them onto the cold window panes, creating your own indoor blizzard. In the kitchen, a massive chipped enamel basin was brought out for the sacred task of making the Olivier salad. Everyone had a job. The mother chopped the boiled potatoes and carrots. The father diced the doctor's sausage, and the children peeled the hard-boiled eggs. The smell of the sharp pickles mixing with mayonnaise was intoxicating. The apartment smelled of fresh cold pine needles from the real tree standing in the corner, decorated with fragile glass ornaments, and the sweet, rare scent of tangerines brought home in a string bag. As the television played the classic movie The Irony of Fate in the background, we worked together, surrounded by the incredible warmth of family. We were preparing for a miracle, and in those moments, surrounded by love and simple traditions, the miracle was already happening. When we look back at these forgotten details, these heavy glass bottles, the ticking clocks, the burnt sugar, and the shared mugs of kvass, it becomes clear what we are truly longing for. We do not just miss the physical objects of the 1970s. We miss the way we felt when we held them. We miss the feeling of our youth, the comforting presence of our parents when they were still young and strong, and the innocent certainty that our whole lives were stretching out beautifully ahead of us. We miss the warmth of a time when we needed less to feel perfectly, completely happy. The world has changed and it has moved on, but these deeply etched memories belong forever to us, safely tucked away in the warmest corners of our souls. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. It helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I want to ask you a question. Which of these 20 rituals touched your heart the most? Or what beautiful memory from your childhood did I forget to mention? Please, pour yourself another cup of tea and write your personal story in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for remembering with me.